Now, the Health Secretary, during his speech at conference yesterday, said he'll ban transgender women from being treated in female hospital wards in England.
Well, he announced this in a speech at the party conference. Doesn't everything come from the party conference, saying he is pushing against what he called wokery in the NHS?
Well, is it a good idea to ban trans women from women's wards? Joining us now are Debbie Hayton, transgender teacher and activist. Good morning to you. And Amy Nicole-Turner, author and broadcaster. Good morning. Let's start with you, if I may, Amy. What did you make of what you heard from the Health Secretary yesterday?
I don't know. I think they get very overexcited at Tory party conference, don't they? Maybe it's because they're among like-minded people. They just let it all out. But I think this is deflection politics, guys, because transgender people make up less than 1% of the population, whereas the multiple problems facing the NHS affect 100% of the population. Huge waiting lists, can't get a GP appointment, people dying, not being able to get ambulances, and yet let's focus on this. Oh, but also on day 2 of historical industrial action of consultants and doctors going on strike at the same time, yet let's attack some trans people who would probably make up about 7,000 patients in a year, which would mean they could probably have a private room anyway. This has also never been complained about across the NHS. No patient has complained, no doctor has complained. This has come out of populist politics, and it's extremely ugly, and it's extremely worrying, really, and pointless.
Well, OK. Debbie, what would you say to what you're hearing from Amy?
Well, there have been problems and people have complained. And as a transgender person, I was quite encouraged that the government is actually talking about how best to include transgender people. This word banning, I think, is unhelpful, actually. What we should be looking at is what is the best way of accommodating transgender people like me in hospital. What's been shown in the past is treating us in exactly the same way as women and putting us with women is not necessarily the best course of action, and it has caused problems. The idea that to make separate provision elsewhere, that's fine. Let's look at building those ideas and building policy that works.
Debbie,
not policy.
What would you be comfortable with if you had to be admitted to hospital? What would you be comfortable with?
Well, what's happened before when I've been in hospital since the transition was I was found a bay by myself or a place by myself. That's what's happened, and that's what's worked.
Amy, can I ask you, I know you're a mum. One of the things that Steve Barclay talked about was the language that has sort of started to come out of the NHS, things like chest feeding, the removal of women from women's health. There have been the removal of references to women in advice on the menopause, issues around cervical and ovarian cancer, reference to pregnant people instead of women. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, for this to be sorted out? And the Health Secretary does have a point.
Well, trans men are at a higher risk of suffering from cervical cancer because of not being included in some of the literature and some of the calls to get a cervical screening. So that's kind of where that came from. It's also really nominal, these language inclusions, and they're really over exaggerated. What is affecting mothers at the moment is the horror that is maternity services, which is actually putting a lot of women off having children within the NHS at the moment. That's a conversation that needs to be had, not some language in some pamphlets for LGBTQ plus parents. Like, we're just distracting from the real problems within the NHS. And actually, it's not a political priority for most people. The top political priorities of the voters are cost of living and health. The inclusion of trans people does not come even in the top 5 priorities of voters. So the fact that Steve...
Is that something, Debbie, that you're in agreement with, that you two end up agreeing with?
Well, I think what I would like is a government that bases its policies in reality and not in a fantasy, and governments that start talking about the reality of human bodies and our sex. That's what we need to hear.
Thank you both very much indeed, Debbie Hayton, Amy Nicole-Turner. Thank you both very much indeed.